Thank you, Olivia. And again, welcome everyone to today's office hour session. This will be our last session for the remainder of this training year. The training year ends on June 30th. So this will be our last official office hours. So I wanted to have a moment with you around, we've done this before. If you remember, we've done a listening session before, I think the tail end of last year. So we want to open it up for you. And Tim and I have a couple topics. I know he's going to address or try to generate some discussion and engagement from you all on any hot topics that you guys have, but wanted to open it up just for a listening opportunity to listen on areas and us, Tim be addressing challenges that you guys are having, but want to make sure we're clear. As you know, we mentioned in our last probably few office hours that we are not allowed to have any live Q&A relative to 340B related policy and regulatory kind of guidance. So as long as it's operational in nature, we can certainly have those live conversations around 340B. And if there are any other questions that kind of delve into the litigation or regulatory aspects, then we can certainly hold on to those, and I will get those submitted to BIPIC on the back end. But as long as it's operational in nature relative to 340B, certainly doable and allowable. And also any other just general pharmacy ops discussion, that's all fair game for today's discussion. All right, so we'll spend about 20 to 30, well, about 30 minutes, depending on the conversation that we're having, and then we'll wrap up our session. So again, open table. If you have any questions that you've been holding on to, be sure to share those with us. You can do those in the chat to keep the conversation going. In the meantime, I'm going to also, before I give over to Tim, one last piece. So I will also put this in our chat, but there have been some directives that I've shared in our last 2 office hours around if you have 340B related questions or just other pharmacy questions that you'd like to have HRSA or the Office of Pharmacy Affairs address, you can do so, and I'll provide those directions in our chat through Apexus Answers. All right, so I'm going to hand things over to Tim to kind of get the conversation started. Tim?
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. As Brandon mentioned, this is just going to kind of be a free flow. I'll be checking the Q&A. We have very few really solid topics. We're just trying to pull things in from you on questions, and perhaps some of them we won't be able to answer due to the restrictions that BIPIC has put on us right now as far as what we can speak about. But we're going to start off with a couple that I've been seeing on Nattlepod, and I've been getting direct emails and calls about. One of them has to do with Express Scripts. So I'm sure that all of you have received some sort of communication from Express Scripts wanting you to do an audit of your prescriptions. And this was really a very weird, I've never even seen a desk audit, anything close to this, that we were provided 10 days to respond to it. And it was almost an all or nothing. And so I was hoping, I'd have a few more answers by now, but Express Scripts hasn't let us know, how do we respond if something is not a 340B prescription? It says we have to prove that it is not. And my request to those of you on the line today, if any of you have had feedback from Express Scripts, either reach out to me directly or post on Nattlepod. How do you respond if one of those prescriptions is a retail prescription? I've heard from a number of people, out of 50 prescriptions, 5 of them were returned to stock. So none of it really makes sense what Express Scripts is trying to do right now, because as you know, if we don't respond and they say all the scripts are 340B, they won't be able to collect the marketing rebate from the manufacturer on it. And it's just not making a lot of sense. So my request to you all would be, if you have gotten more information on how to respond or how to let Express Scripts know this is the script was put back on the computer, it was never filled, please post that and share that with us. Caitlin has just asked, do we legally need to respond to Express Scripts regarding these claims? Legally, I don't know that you do. But the realization is if in fact some of those claims are not 340B, you by not responding are acknowledging that you agree they are 340B. So that's where the whole thing, it just didn't make sense. It didn't seem well put together. It seemed like something just thrown out very quickly. And I have no idea what their end move is in this. Tom Murga from the 340B report and I chatted about it a little bit. And I know in his article about this, he reached out to Express Scripts to get their comments, and they never got back to him. They basically refused to comment. So, Caitlin, your response would be, I don't know that you need to legally respond, but understand by how they phrased it, if you don't respond, they will assume then you're agreeing that all of those are 340B eligible prescriptions. So one of the other things, Carrie Hansen has asked if it happens, what happens if they flag it as 340B or don't flag 340B? Do we think it's predatory contracts in our future? Carrie, these are really good questions. And unfortunately, we just don't have the answer. Again, I always consider any communication from a PBM as with bad intent. They have nothing, they are not our friends, they are not our partners, they are not looking really to improve transparency and to improve the 340B program. They really are looking to protect their bottom line. So yeah, does it make sense if in-house pharmacies are getting this information and they say, well, we sent them 100 scripts and 98 of them are 340B. All right, we're not giving them a standard contract anymore. Yeah, potentially that could happen. We know that about 5 years ago that happened with CVS Caremark, where they went through the NCPDP file and found any of the closed door pharmacies and sent them contracts that reimburse significantly less. So yes, Carrie, I think that's a possibility. But again, we don't know enough about it. We don't know what their desire was from doing this or what their end result potentially, the intent would be. The good thing is if you are in one of the, I think it's getting close to 25 states now with protective language at a state level, you could be protected from any discriminatory contracts based on any non-Medicare prescriptions or insured patients. So I appreciate Derek just posted a reminder to us and a link to NAC's Noddlepod posting about the request for information about PBMs. And Vasharia covered that very well last week during the 340B discussion office hours. And I feel everyone, the more information FTC gets on PBM practices, the stronger cases we'll have against them in the future. So Derek, thank you very much for posting that as well. Something else that came up recently, and I realized it was Sanofi, but if any of you are contemplating submitting data to ESP 340B and opening up your contract pharmacy, whatever, realize that they are only going to accept prescriptions within 45 days of the dispensing. And if you're using a unit of use product, this makes sense, a vial of insulin, an inhaler, or something like that. But if you're working on filling a package size on a limited use but expensive and very positive 340B drug, you may not hit a full package size within the 45-day window. I received an email from Holly Russo about this, and she was able to get some more data, and come to find out a number of the other manufacturers, not the ones that are impacting us as covered entities, or not as covered entities, but as federal grantees, as health centers. But many of them had language in there about the claims needing to be submitted within 45 days. So I guess if you're considering submitting your data, just beware that may not be a final resolution. Your life will not necessarily go back to normal just because you did that. So I'm taking a look at some of the other questions that have come up. One of them, we have our FQHC dispensary is transitioning to an actual pharmacy, and they were looking for resources on that. It's not a question I can really answer well in a 5-minute snippet here, but I think it would be very beneficial to look back in some of our past office hours. And we do have one that we did probably a year ago on how do you set up an in-house pharmacy, and is it the right thing for you to do? Right now, there's so much talk about putting in in-house pharmacies because of the manufacturer's restrictions, and a lot of health centers have moved that direction. And I think it's a wonderful idea. Any of you who know me, that the in-house pharmacies, I feel, are so beneficial, not just to the 340B bottom line, but they're so beneficial to your patients and to your providers. Having an on-site pharmacist for medication questions and following up on patients' adherence or compliance, I think they're wonderful. So I'm excited to see that a lot more pharmacies or a lot more health centers are considering putting in their in-house pharmacies. The other thing, though, to consider, and this is something that also came up recently, I had the question, do we still do contract pharmacies? Well, we hear about all of these issues. My answer to that is, yeah, if you don't have a contract pharmacy program right now, you're collecting 100% of nothing. Your 340B savings is zero. So even if there are issues with 3-4 of the manufacturers restricting, you still have 340B value out there that you can bring back to your health center to expand programs, add community health workers, all sorts of positive things for the patients in your community. So I would say it is not a time to say, no, we just need to wait and see. Every day that you're not involved in maximizing your 340B program is a day that your patients may not be getting a service that you could have provided them. So I'm going to take a look at a few of the posts right now. 1 second, folks, while I read this. Boy, this is very interesting. Sam posted something about one of the PBMs reversing something because it was or taking all of the money back on a claim because it was not reversed within a 14-day window. Those of you with in-house pharmacies know we have to be very cautious about abiding PBM regulations when it comes to when a script needs to be returned. This one fell 1 day outside of this 14-day window, and they're looking to take back $1,700. I think this is a good reminder for all of us, and thanks, Sam, for posting that, is that the PBMs hold all the power. We may feel we're in the right, but if they've got it in a contract that we have signed, we have to abide by it. And so we moved to checking scripts at a 10 or a 12-day period and getting them put back in stock. But Sam, this is a great reminder to everyone with an in-house pharmacy, don't let it go past that 14-day window. I'm very sorry for your loss here because it's significant. It's not a $20 or $30 claim. So good luck in seeing if you can fight this. Wow. Anthony, your question is beyond my scope, having to do with California and fee-for-service having the prescriptions wrapped into the PPS. Anthony, that may be a good thing to post on Noddlepod. And I don't know if California itself has its own kind of listening or news network. In Michigan, the PCA has a listserv for Michigan pharmacists if we've got something specific going on, and we utilize that. So Anthony, please post your question on Noddlepod or perhaps through a listserv that CPCA may offer. Okay, I'm looking, Sarah Lee has a question regarding, what we discuss here. And the idea is that many of our health centers are more than just a community health center or an FQHC. Many of them also have Ryan White or STD grants associated with them. And her question was, it would be helpful to have a session that would address some of these grantees as well. It's a little bit difficult for us because through NAC, we are the National Association of Community Health Centers, and that is our focus. But it's something that we could consider and think about in the future, and potentially bringing in some of our partners to share information about their these other programs. Brandon and I will have to discuss if this is something that could be done on the teaching and technical assistance office hours sometime next year, or because of the, I'm sure, 340B focus that we want to keep, if that needs to be done on Basharia Keys's 340B office hours. But I think that's a great question, and I think it would be wonderful for us to work closer with our partners in those other areas at some point. So Sarah, thanks for bringing that up.
Hey, Tim, if I can add to Sarah, really good point. Also, if you can provide any specific topics or a focus around that, because I totally agree with you, because the reason I'm asking, because that will be a way for us to, if I need to pull in our clinical affairs colleagues within NAC, because I know they're doing a lot of work on that end too. But if it's 340B or just pharmacy specific related, then let Tim and I know that, because we can certainly always pull in some of our other NAC colleagues as well, just to share some additional work that they're doing with that end. But very good point.
Thanks, Brandon. Kristen asked a question, and I'm not really sure that it's one that I can address because it kind of surrounds litigation and what's going on. Kristen, if you want to reach out to me directly, you can find me on Noddlepod, or feel free to email me, and I'm happy to perhaps discuss this further, but this isn't really something I feel that we can discuss right now.
And Kristen, I also shared in the chat there, so that's an additional direction you can go as well with the Office of Pharmacy Affairs. So reach out to Tim, or you can take those steps as well. So
Carrie Hansen has been tapping furiously and asking lots of questions today. And so she's got another one in here. And this has to do with something that happened April 1st, and it has to do with one of the PBMs now requesting more than just the 420DK to identify claims. And they're asking for the 08 in the determination field. And we've been lucky in Michigan, because it's written in our Medicaid statute that only the 20DK has to be in. And so we're working on having that reversed, but I know that there are other states that don't have as well-defined requirements for identifying 340B prescriptions. And so you're going to need to reach out potentially to your state Medicaid and find out if, in fact, this additional requirement, the cost basis determination, if that is something that is part of their Medicaid requirements. So I don't have a real perfect answer for that. Other than one of our pharmacists in Michigan has been very tenacious about working through one of the PBMs that's been an issue, as well as our state Medicaid, and it looks like it's being resolved in Michigan at least. So I wish I could give you more. Mobala has asked a question about high copays. And again, we kind of discussed this last week at one of the office hours, and high copays and addressing those for patients below 200% is so much easier than dealing with patients above 200%. Above 200%, we run into concerns with violating our PBM contracts. And as Sam had pointed out, they can hold us to those contracts whenever they choose to. So the reversal he did at day 15 and not at day 14 is costing him $1,700. So the realization is that if we are discounting things for patients over 200%, we could fall into that prohibition of waiving or discounting copays. With patients under 200%, we have some protections. It's possible to build a safe harbor where we realize that we're expected by BIPIC and by within the compliance manual and within the spirit of the 340B program and the missions of our health centers to help patients. Those under 200%, we can build that safe harbor around them. And the potential for doing secondary billing to an EPAP or a sliding fee program exists there. As with anything, there are risks involved. So this is not something that I can come to you and say, yep, this is the solution. This is how you do it. And guaranteed no problems. I'm not saying that at all. I am simply saying this is an alternative and something that I feel if you write into policy and you put those very strong boundaries around it, that I think you would probably have a pretty good case of supporting that should a PBM question it. Brandon, thank you for posting the link to the recorded sessions. I think that's, these can be so valuable, and I'm so glad that they're still available because a lot of time and effort's been put into these over the years. And sometimes it's good to just listen to them and get some ideas from what other people are doing around the country. And then feel free, again, post your comments on Noddlepod or feel free to reach out to me with additional questions. Yeah, Samir has just asked another question about one of the PBMs. I personally do not have any experience dealing with this PBM and getting out of submitting that actual cost. Again, in Michigan, we have a defense because it's in statute and we have it in Medicaid bulletins that all pharmacies are to be reimbursed at NADAC, or the National Average Drug Acquisition Cost, plus our professional dispensing fee, if you are an independent or a chain of 7 or less stores. And so the being forced to add the 08 and submitting actual cost isn't an issue in Michigan because our Medicaid protects us against that. I've heard of this PBM doing this before. They are one of the bad players that when we discuss issues with legislators and why we need national protection, like some of the bills that we have out there, it's contracts like this that we use as an example. But unfortunately, Samir, I don't have a good response for you. So Christopher has asked a question. Give me a second while I read that. Christopher, you got a really good question. I don't have a quick answer for you on it. Again, perhaps if you'd like to reach out directly, I could, spend some time thinking through this, and perhaps work with you on it. But I don't have a quick answer to your question on this reimbursement. It's such an issue now because of what Gilead did, and with their free med program, that there's only like $82.50 available. It's often, the juice isn't often worth the squeeze when we look at doing a contract pharmacy arrangement to get these products. So again, if you want, feel free to reach out. Serena, great question. And Serena's question is, are copay assistance cards able to be utilized for patients who have high copays, provided it is not Medicare or Medicaid? And the answer to that is yes. There is no restrictions on that. And that, I think, is one way that we can certainly help out any of our commercial patients that have high deductible plans, issues where they'll come back with a copay of $500, something like that. My son is on a product by AbbVie. We have a wonderful card, and we pay $5 for his medication, and this is a $5,000 medication. So yes, take advantage of copay assistance cards. I have looked, and I have not seen any of them that say this card is not valid at any pharmacy where 340B products are utilized. I've never seen that. All of them will say the patient can't be part of a government program, and that's the Medicaid or Medicare part. And that obviously hurts my heart, because it's often our Medicare patients that have deductibles that are so high, or copays because they can't afford a good Advantage plan or something else. And those are the folks we so much want and need to help, but we can't use those copay assistance cards with them. So you're right on that, Serena. But yes, do use them. We keep a packet in a drawer at my pharmacy, and if we see something like this, we'll shuffle through that. I know that a lot of the companies have gotten away from using the actual little cards now, and patients have to go online and sign up. But we also work with our patients to help them do that. So yes, please use those copay assistance cards. Melissa asked a question, and Melissa, I feel very guilty about this, but I have not reviewed Mark Cuban's new efforts to provide low-cost drugs. I'm sure I should have by now. Sometimes Mark Cuban I just don't pay attention to, but I apologize, and I don't have anything to offer you on that. So thanks for adding that, and the link there. I'll take a look at it, and if you want to reach out to me, feel free, and we can chat about it. Give me till next week to get to that, but feel free to reach out. Interesting. Thanks, Shanika. So, Brandon, I've kind of gone through things in the chat. I think I've caught everything in here. Have you had anything else pop up?
No, but while you were talking, Tim, I said, let me go check Notalpod just to see if there are any recent, comments, posts. And I saw where you responded to one of the members on there, but I think her question was around what is the acceptable replenishment percentage for gateways. And you did respond, but I saw that it was just you and her. So maybe you want to kind of, reiterate that with the group possibly.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, that was something I jumped on before getting here on office hours. I knew I needed to get on and do some commenting. The question came up that, some of the gateways have replenishment thresholds of, one was 98% and one was 65%. And for those of you that don't know the term, a replenishment threshold would be when X% of a retail bottle has been used for 340B drugs, that's when we would order a 340B to replace those drugs. And it's real interesting because I asked Jason Atlas, who's now with ABC, but was at Apexus. We were at a conference and chatting, and I said, Jason, how do you feel about, replenishment? Because I do like a 75% in my pharmacy. And he goes, Tim, that's diversion. I go, well, but it's really not. If anything, it's temporary. It's a temporary diversion. And his response, very straight-faced, was, Tim, diversion is diversion, temporary or not. And so my thought has changed on that. And I'm not really sure how this gateway does a 65% replenishment, because anything that other 35% means that there is 340B medication at that pharmacy. And while it's being kept virtually, that 340B medication potentially could be given to a retail patient, and that would be diversion. I understand how virtual inventories work, and I threw that back at Jason, and Jason's response still was, that still is viewed as diversion. So I was very curious that any of the gateways were doing that. So Brandon, thanks for bringing that up. Again, I found that quite curious.
You bet. Tim, I just posted another more recent one from Nautipod as well. It's around the OSV contract pharmacy. So maybe you want to touch on that as well.
Wow, I wish I had an answer on this one. You really gave me the ugly one, Brandon. Thank you. This has come up. We've had a couple of OSV things, and those of you who've been around a while knew that in the old days, there were 5 questions on the OSV, and I always talked about them as, this is an open book test. Every one of you health centers should pass this. You know what they're going to ask, have your answers ready, and be able to support them. Well, they pulled that about 2.5 years ago. And at that point, there was nothing regarding 340B in the OSVs. I think that OSV reviewers want to involve 340B, even if it's not a part of the OSV expressly written there. And so some of them have kind of found some ways of looking at our contract pharmacies where under column 2 of Form 5A for contract services, it discusses that they must be credentialed and privileged. And as all of you know, to credential and privilege a Walmart is virtually impossible. You aren't going to get access to the pharmacist CE history or their state license, or even some of it involved their vaccination history and other things. This was kind of over the top, and that's where I feel it's kind of rogue reviewers trying to find some gotchas. As you know, if you're an auditor or a reviewer, if everybody is 100%, people start thinking you're not a very good auditor or reviewer. So they've kind of grasped at some straws here. I really believe, and the response, if this would come up, is that every pharmacy service agreement, every PSA has 12 basic requirements required by HRSA that are in there. And one of them has to do with, it doesn't specifically say the words privileging or credentialing, but it deals with the fact that you've got to be running a legal pharmacy. And for anyone to be running a pharmacy that follows the laws of your state board of pharmacy, the DEA, some of the other governing bodies for pharmacy, if you're following those, if you're ensuring, to be a legal pharmacy, your pharmacists have to be licensed in their state. And in order to maintain your license, you have to have CEs. And so it all kind of, snowballs that simply by being legal and running a a pharmacy that is meeting the expectations. Another thing that I see included in a lot of the pharmacy services agreement is, we ensure that all of our employees meet the qualifications necessary for dispensing medications through Medicare or Medicaid. And that would be those exclusion lists that you're supposed to check on a regular basis. Most of us get those checked electronically through our PSAOs on a monthly basis. And so through all of that, I've had a couple of health centers that have been able to talk through that issue with the OSB reviewer. But I need to tell you, this is something that we're actually, Pasharia Keys and I are discussing to figure out how do we approach BIPIC and get this kind of more accepted, just because of the language that's required in our contracts. A pharmacy is just really a different kind of an animal when it comes to that. So if you have a lab and you are CLIA certified, you don't have to do any more. And that's written into the OSV kind of workbook that they follow. So we're hoping at some point, maybe we can get language that would say, if you are a contract pharmacy that has all of the required inclusions by HRSA in your pharmacy service agreement, you qualify. No further credentialing or privileging would be necessary. We don't have that right now, but realize we are aware of this, and it is something that we're discussing and trying to figure out how to work with BIPIC to clean this up. We just don't want to play gotcha games with OSB reviewers. They have hard jobs, and I for one am pleased that we are held to a standard as health centers. And in my mind, I think that's one of the reasons that some of the manufacturers have chosen to exclude us from the things that they're doing to other entities, is that we are held to a higher standard. And so I'm not totally against OSVs, obviously. I just don't know that the 340B program is an area that unexperienced reviewers need to be delving into. Since as we know, 340B knowledge and implementation and regulations are all very explicit, but they're also very difficult at times for interpreting. So that's a good question. I wish I had a more solid answer, but do know that we're working on this. Dan Kane has asked for fee-for-service claims, are states allowed to reimburse you at less than AAC by using MIAC or other pricing models? Dan, I don't know the answer to that. The only thing I know for sure is that when, and I'm not 100% if it's in regulation or not, but we know if we use 340B for fee-for-service claims, we can only submit our actual acquisition cost. And so the assumption is that's what we would be reimbursed at. Dan, I'm sorry, I don't know if it is, if that would be allowed to reimburse less than AAC. That would be frightening, considering, that we're making nothing on them anyway. I'm sorry, I don't have more. Anthony, a good question. Have there been any recent changes to the data requests for HRSA Bazell Group 340B audits? I am not aware of any changes. I sat through some of the auditing sessions at the 340B conference in February, and I don't recall anything, strikingly new. One thing I do believe was Office of Pharmacy Affairs did want to increase audits by, I think, 20. I think that's what they put in their budget for President Biden, that they wanted to do an additional 20 audits, which is, I think that's roughly 10% more. And I think that's obviously it's fair. We should be running our 340B programs in such a way we should never have a concern to have someone come in and take a look at it. And so being prepared, all of us, is the best way to enter any sort of a HRSA or Bazell group audit with our heads high. So doing an annual mock audit, I think, is really a safe idea. If you haven't been audited by HRSA yet, realize it's not if you're ever going to get audited, it's when. And so they will get to you eventually, and may not be this year or next year, but it could be the year after that. So be prepared. So Brandon, I've been looking in the chat.
I think we might be good, Tim. I asked folks earlier if they had any additional topics or questions. I think we may have them all at the moment. So guys, if you have any additional ones, feel free to throw those in the chat. But what I will do is, Olivia, if we can move on to our next slide, we'll try to wrap up our today's office hour. So again, as always, have Tim and I's emails here. So like I said, this will be the last office hours for this training year, which ends June 30th. But again, I said I want to do that this year, Tim, but maybe next year we'll really jump on getting the steering committee together. But and that will be a great way as a nice little medium to generate some focus topics to get really, get a pulse of what's happening on the ground. But certainly in the meantime, though, and even though we're not having another office hours, please feel free to share any topics with Tim and I via our email, or as always, Noddlepod. Noddlepod's a great way to kind of throw in some, any topics or concerns that you have that you want us to address. So that's one way to get that out. And as keep in mind, evaluations will be sent out to all of our attendees after the session. All right, so we're going to go to our next slide here. So just a couple of updates for you. There is a new 340B impact survey. I know NAC is conducting via Vicharia Keys and the regulatory team, conducting a 10-question survey. I'm really trying to understand, how we as health centers are utilizing the 340B pricing discount program and its impact. With the restrictions and how those restrictions have significant impacts on health center operations. So they really wanted just to get your feedback on that. It's really helpful for them as they kind of plan any next steps in their regulatory and legislative approaches. So be sure to make sure that feedback submitted. And a key point is this survey was sent to all health center CEOs via email. So if you don't mind, just touching base with your CEOs and your leaders to make sure they receive that survey. And if they have not, you have Gracie's email here to reach out, okay? So very important that we get your feedback on that impact survey. Next, as you heard us mention a few times during today's office hours, and you may have participated in one of the office hours, but we have developed a 340B office hours, and that's led by my colleague Vicharia Keys in Regulatory Affairs as a space for the 340B policy related questions that you guys may have. And if there are any other operational questions, Tim is typically on those, so we can address those in that space as well. So I'll put the link in the chat. So if you have not registered, please feel free to get registered for those. They have 2 upcoming trainings to close out the training year on May 10th and June 14th. And I believe they start from 2 o'clock to 3 p.m. Eastern time. So feel free to jump on in there and get registered for that. And as we move to our next slide, a couple upcoming events just to keep on your radar. Myself and a couple colleagues, we identified, and this is not pharmacy related, but we identified, I think it's helpful for you all to see in case there's some people on who would like to participate in this. We're developing an additional training resource that starts next week, the 28th. There's a 28th session as well as a June 9th session from 3 to 4 on each day. And it's looking at vision services in health centers, and it's going to be hosted between NAC and ACU, the Association of Clinicians for the Underserved. And also the group Prevent Blindness. So we're looking at ways that we can provide resources to health centers who may or may not have vision services as part of their complement of offerings. And if they're looking to add vision services, these 2 sessions will kind of provide you a springboard to getting those services offered at your respective health center. So exciting. This is the first time we've done that. So looking forward to how that turns out. But if you'd like to get registered, you have my email. So shoot me an email and we'll try to get you registered for those 2 sessions. And then lastly, you may or may not have participated in this last year. So what was it, last spring? But we're hosting almost like a refresh of last year's Emergency Preparedness and Response Learning Collaborative, NAC, along with National Nurse-Led Care Consortium. We're partnered together. I'm actually leading this project. So feel free to reach out to me for any additional registration information, but there'll be a 4-series or 4-module learning collaborative. Again, a refresher of what you should be able to find easily available via Google search with the same title. It's those same topics, but we're just doing a refresher of the data and updating them as we've kind of gone to present day with the pandemic. So those sessions start May 17th, and it'll be each Tuesday through June 7th. So each Tuesday from 17th through June 7th, from 2 to 3 o'clock. It's actually not 3:30, 2 to 3 o'clock. We've shortened that time to 60 minutes. All right, and again, contact me if you have any additional questions around that. Right now, we have about 56 folks registered, which is great, but we're always open to more. All right, as we move on, again, Health Center Resource Clearinghouse, this is my go-to if I have, there's some questions around some resources that NAC offers. Feel free to go to the clearinghouse, throw that in the search, and you'll find a lot of tools that are already available, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Pharmacy, I'm sure, is part of some of those resources that you'll find as well. All right. And again, find NAC on all the social media platforms. Hopefully you're following us already. If not, there's all of our handles there to get connected. And I think that might wrap us up for today's session. So thank you all for all those questions, the topics. I know Tim and I are trying to figure out how we're going to wing today's session. I think it turned out really, really well. So again, if you have any additional comments, questions, head on over to NoddlePod. If you have any colleagues who are, feel like they should be a part of NoddlePod, shoot Tim and I an email, and we'll assess and make sure that they fit for those groups, and we'll get them an invite into the NoddlePod groups. Okay. All right. Thank you all. I'm giving you 8 more minutes to your afternoon. Enjoy your day. Thanks, Tim.
Bye, everyone.